Hello, AP World Historians. This is your AP World History teacher, Ben Osborne, here to talk a little bit about AP World sections 4.1 to 4.2. I'm a little tiny man today in this little corner. For some reason, my background's a little funky, but whatever. We're going to deal with it as best we can. I hope you're all doing well out there, and let's check out 4.1 and 4.2. So where are we now? Well, we are still in Unit 2, time-wise, which is 1450 to 1750, but we have just gotten done talking about some of those land-based empires, the ones whose power is based on land. And now we're going to be looking into a certain couple of countries in Europe that are primarily sort of sea-based or using their sea-based power to do a whole bunch of stuff. So that is our transition. You'll remember that we talked about a few of these countries when we talked about absolutism and constitutionalism, but that was sort of before this period. And so now that that has all come about, we're in this period now where they're going to start reaching out and doing a little bit about exploration. So let's check out, first off, 4.1. And we're going to take a look here at why and how some of these European countries start to explore. So first off, why Europeans begin to explore is a bit of a complicated question, as it says up there. There's really not one thing. This is a classic example of those things that historians love to talk about how things are different and depending on how certain things are and yada yada, and it's complicated and stuff. That's a great example here because there's more than one thing that is going on that is going to lead to this initial movement of Europeans throughout the world to kind of check things out and find out new places. One of the big issues here is that demographic pressure in the 1450s or so. We are going to see more people being born, which means that there's going to be less space for everybody. This is sort of after some of these great plagues have come through and we have a lot more population going on. Another thing, too, is primogeniture. That is the idea that the oldest son will inherit. Means that there's a ton of aristocrat sons around, like second and third and fourth sons who have nothing really going on, and they are looking on the lookout for more land. Prior to this, they had done things like go on crusades, but now those crusades are a little more difficult to do, and there's just not as much kind of unity for doing that. So they're still looking around, looking for something that they can do to make things work. There's some other things too, though. Religious dissent, so a number of religious dissenters, such as Puritans, Pilgrims, and others. People who are looking to convert other people to their religion, specifically to Catholicism. People who are looking for work. People who are looking for adventure. People who are looking to get rich. I mean, there's a ton of different reasons why individual Europeans are doing this kind of stuff as well. So again, we have these sort of like big trends, like primogeniture being a problem, demographic pressure, but we also have these sort of smaller things too, which is individual choices that people are making in history to deal with these kind of problems. One other thing too that we're going to start to see then is this Omani-European rivalry. So we'll talk in a second more about the Portuguese, but the Portuguese essentially have set up a bunch of trading posts, in particular in this Omani coast, but it doesn't go very well. They end up being repeatedly, as it says here, they get repeatedly forced out over and over again. And what happens then is that's going to lead to people like Columbus to start looking for new ways to trade with the East. So there's an initial wave of the Portuguese to do some exploration, which we'll talk about in a second. But once that happens, then there's another wave of people wanting to do more, to go to places like America or find new kind of trade because they were having difficulty with the trading partners that they had. All right. So here's a great picture of the Portuguese Empire at sort of its height here. You can see lots of different areas where they are going to travel to. We'll talk more about them in just a second. But you can see in particular all up and down sort of little bits of Africa there. They are going to be in those areas. And so you can see the area known as Zanzibar. That is going to be a good example of a place that they're going to have problems with because of this Omani rivalry. If I click forward just one more, you can see this is this Omani Empire. This is about 1856, so it's much later. But earlier on, still, they had some control over this area and were causing the Portuguese some difficulties. So the Portuguese make their way around Africa. They set up a few trading zones. So, for example, Zanzibar is one of the places that they are from, or that they are setting up. But then these Omanis are really unhappy with this, and they try to push them out. And so because they have a weak hold here, they don't have the strength to be able to move across this area in ways they want, there's going to be more incentive for people like Christopher Columbus and others to go around and try to find new places that they could potentially stay. All right, so one of our key questions then here about how is going to be answered primarily by issues of technology. So Europeans had sailing ships. They had tons of different sailing ships. They had all kinds of abilities to cross from one part of the ocean to another. Well, not ocean, but from one part of Europe to another. They crossed the Mediterranean Sea. There were ships on that sea for a very long time. But the problem is that vessels in this period are not like great. They're not really, really well put together. They are not designed properly to make it so that they can do these kind of things. So one of the big changes here is that we're going to end up having new kinds of technology. So, they have been traveling, around in places and even a little bit off coast, but there's often going to be wrecks and things. So this new technology is going to help them out a lot. There wasn't one specific technology, though. So, for example, new and old technology is going to help here. So improved map making led to better astronomical charts. So one thing for sure is that the skies are going to be fixed at certain parts of the year, and you can kind of gauge where these things are going to be. So if I know the North Star is going to be here, at certain times of the year, then I can rely on that, and I can use that for navigation to be able to figure out sort of what direction I'm going in, right? So north-south was not very difficult to figure out as a result of that, but this astronomical charts were going to help them out a lot. Also, compasses will come into more regular use, again, sort of invented by the Chinese, though the Europeans also kind of invented it as well, but the idea of a compass is something that wasn't really adopted as well until around this period, so they're going to start to adopt it and use it a lot. We've talked a lot about lateen sails, so there's going to be more adoption in Europe of lateen sails. They're going to have these new rudders and things, and we're going to end up with these new ships. I'll show you pictures of a couple of these in a second, but the Flute, Carrack, and Caravel are going to be three really important ships that are going to help the Europeans to do a lot of expansion. One key to early Portuguese success was this guy named Henry the Navigator. Now, it's kind of a hilarious name because he really didn't navigate very much of anywhere, so that's kind of strange. He mostly stayed pretty close to the coast, but his sponsorship was something that was very important. There's a lot of historical debate, like you see this today, that like originally the way we were always taught was that he sponsored this sort of like navigation school in Portugal, that people learned how to do navigation, they studied navigation and stuff. I read recently that that's maybe not kind of all it's cracked up to be, that, I mean, he kind of did that, but it wasn't like a formal school or anything, but regardless, it is something that he did. He did have a lot of influence on that. So again, he didn't navigate, he didn't do much to navigate by himself, but he sponsors it and he gets other people started along the way. All right, here's a couple examples of those ships that we were talking about there. So this one that is right behind my head here is known as a flute. You can tell it's Dutch because of all the flags and stuff. So this is a Dutch flag here. This is a little bit farther up above my fingers, that's the flag of Amsterdam, which weirdly enough is an X, has three X's on it. Very strange. This other ship over on the other side over there, that is going to be a Carrack. So they're somewhat similar to each other, right? Couple of things that you can see here that are going to make them better. So you can kind of see, even if it's from a side view, that they are sort of deep hulled, right? Like the hulls are going to go deep into the water. So for example, this little line here that goes along is the water line, essentially. That water line then is going to be deeper into the water, and keeping it deeper into the water like that means it has a lot more stability. Also on both of these ships, you can see these sort of like, not quite rudder kind of things, but keels basically. These long sort of things in the middle that help them cut through the water. So if you think about like a boat having a flat bottom, it means that it has a lot of tippiness to it, right? But it also means that it's much easier to tip over. Think about like a canoe with like a flat bottom. These ships, on the other hand, though, are going deep into the water, almost like a V shape, which means that while they're very tender, they will kind of like go to either way, they're not likely to fall over into the water. So they're much more secure, much more safe. You can also see from these two that they're going to have a combination of different sails. So they'll have both square as well as lateen. You can see the lateen sail here above me on this flute as well. Now, don't worry about trying to identify each individual ship. Like, I just can't imagine you would ever have a question where it's like, what's a flute and a caravel or whatever? Like, they're all very similar ships. But the major difference is that the flute, this one that's behind me here, is mostly a merchant vessel. You can tell, for example, it's got nice flat, nice flat area on the top for them to be able to load and offload and all that. Whereas the Carrack, which is that one over there, as well as the Caravel, are going to be more geared towards not only trade, but also for military protection. So do you see how the deck has like a little kind of thing on the front and the back of it? like the forecastle and the I guess it's called the aft castle. They're actually probably called something crazy because sailors don't pronounce things right. But anyway, those are places for you to protect the ship. So like if you get attacked by pirates or something, you're higher up like that and you have a little bit of protection on it. So the Carrack and the Caravel were exploration ships that also happened to trade, whereas the Flute here is mostly going to be a trading ship instead. But these new innovations in ship technology means that they are able to go farther, do more than they ever had before. Okay, I just really love these pictures here. So this is Prince Henry the Navigator over there. That's kind of the classical image of him, you know, standing around with all of his students and teaching them how to do navigation. Again, I'm not 100% sure that that's exactly what happened, but I just love this picture above me so much. Like I was doing this and I was like, maybe I should just put this whole picture in the scene. But then I kept seeing this picture, this drawing above me of him looking like a weirdo, and I thought that was pretty fun. So anyway, that's supposed to be him above me as well. You can see he's got that E-collar, Elizabethan collar, and then he's just got a really strange look on his face. Anyway, made me laugh. All right, so taking a look here at 4.2 then, the explorationing. So initial exploration was led by Portugal, as we said before. So they are going to be some of the first ones to do this. So there's a couple reasons for this. One of which is that they're on the west coast of the Iberian Peninsula. So they are blocked off basically by Spain from going any further into the Mediterranean. But in addition to being blocked off by Spain, they're also blocked off by Italy. And then, like if they get to the other end of the Mediterranean, there's the Ottoman Turks. So there's just not a lot in the Mediterranean for them, right? So they have sort of an incentive to go to the west if they possibly can. And so they don't really go straight out across the ocean like, you know, Columbus will do eventually, but instead they are going to go down the coast of Africa instead. So, for example, they're going to wonder about like the Trans-Saharan trade, like where does all this trade come from? So they wanted to try to go around these groups who are blocking their abilities, and they were thinking, well, if we can go around these Trans-Saharan trade network, we can maybe make some money out of it. So why don't we give that a try instead? So that's the theory at least, and that's something that they do. And they're going to make their way around that area. So they're going to do this kind of short little hop and a jump down the African coast. And as they do that, they will sort of go further and further. They'll kind of like, you know, a little bit farther, a little bit farther, a little bit farther. One of the problems with Africa for sailing is that little cape there, it's the Gulf of Biafra, is not great for sailing. Like the closer you get to that little sort of arm kind of part of Africa, the winds slow down a lot. So it's very difficult for them to kind of get into those areas. So they're sort of gradually making their way down further and further. And this is encouraged by Prince Henry, of course. And then this famous intrepid explorer, Bartholomew Diaz, is going to be the guy from Europe who rounds the Cape of Good Hope. That's the bottom of Africa. He will round that cape and he like looks out on this huge ocean, and as is typical, his sailors are like, we don't want to do this, because they were scared. So he went back home instead, but he gave all this information. And so eventually then Vasco da Gama will be the guy who is going to make it all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, and he will continue and make it all the way to India, where he will begin doing some of this trade. So the Portuguese are going to establish what is known as a trading post empire. Eventually we will talk about other groups like the English and others in places like India, and what they are going to do is they're going to do like colonization, or they will do where they will control the local economics or the local political systems. The Portuguese had no interest in this, primarily because they just don't have a lot of power to do this. As it says here at the bottom, they were surpassed by others because they're not a very big country, and they don't have a lot of population. So they can't just like ship over, you know, thousands upon thousands of soldiers and start trying to control India. Instead, they set up trading posts and they let people bring things to them instead. So they are the ones who are going to be the intermediaries essentially between the two. Now, that doesn't mean that they were not more than willing to shoot a cannon at people on occasion, and they did quite often protect their, you know, territory or whatever by doing that kind of stuff. But they are essentially going to have these small outposts that are set up around the world that they can trade through. So this is the map that we saw before as well, but you can see it a little bit better here. So this is going to be the Portuguese trip. So you can see over there has the Azores in 1431, the Madeira in 1419, Canary Islands, Cape Verde Islands. You can see them sort of gradually making their way down the coast there. Eventually they will end up going down through the Gulf of Guinea, down towards the bottom. Then you see at the very bottom the Cape of Good Hope, and you see Da Gama coming around that cape there in 1497. Eventually Da Gama in 1498 will make it all the way over to India. So this is a couple of years after Columbus, really, but it's all in the same sort of time period here. And so by doing this, then they will establish these different little trading post empire kind of things. All right. So next up, then we got the Spanish. So they are kind of watching what Portugal's doing. They're pretty close to that, so they can kind of see some of those things. They also had been going through this Reconquista, where they were sort of reconquering the territory that the Muslims had control of, and so they had not really had as much of a chance to do that. But eventually, this Italian guy named Christopher Columbus, or Cristoforo Colombo, comes to them, and he asks for some money to do a adventure, and they agree. So he's seeking a quicker route to the east. But he got the numbers wrong. So the classic kind of tale is that he thought the world was round and everyone else thought it was flat and all this. That's really not true. Remember, we talked about the Renaissance and stuff, that people back then looked at ancient Greeks. Well, the ancient Greeks knew that the world was round. I mean, they could tell with math and everything else. So it wasn't really a question like that. The question was, though, really, could you go that direction and make it, right? He believed that the world was much smaller. So if it's, what is it? I think it's like 13,000 miles or something like that. He thought it was more like 9 or something, right? He thought it was almost half the size that it actually was. So his plan was just go to the west, and then eventually you will just run into Japan or China, right? It's a good thing that America was there for him, though, because he would have just died in the Pacific Ocean if there had not been anything, because he would have just kept going forever. But yeah, he was just wrong about it, and he ends up finding instead this other place. Now, to his dying day, he thought that he was actually in Asia. He was not in Asia, but that's what he thought he was, at least. So we'll talk in a second about his controversy, but he's pretty important because he did make this first trip there and back. So regardless of his personal situations, which we will talk about in a second, he is important for what he does by connecting the world this way. So again, very important figure, even if he's very flawed. And trust me, he is very, very flawed. So Columbus, as it says here, was a pretty terrible person. He made a good 4 voyages over the course of his life. Each one was pretty rough, and it's not just like we today are looking at him and saying he's not a good person. People back then thought the same thing. So, for example, the king and queen actually lock him in prison after his 4th voyage because of all of his horrible things he's doing, literally just murdering people and taking slaves and killing people and all this other kind of horrible stuff. And he will die in prison as a result of this kind of situation. So, pretty bad thing. He does a whole bunch of things, but in addition to things like murder that he's clearly directly responsible for, he has a lot of other consequences too. So spreading disease, for example. They estimate there are probably 8 million Taino Indians in Cuba when he landed there, and within only about maybe 100 years, there were less than 100,000. Some of that was due to murder and pillage by the Spanish, but a lot of it was due to this disease that he spread. So regardless of his importance in history, which is great, very big importance, that is a big issue. One of the things I think is really interesting about him, too, is that he's a great example of kind of a bridging of history. So, you may ask then, why is he sort of famous? Or, have we always celebrated Columbus or something? But that's not the case. Columbus was not celebrated at all, really, in America until about the 1920s or so. I mean, there were definitely people who talked about him and stuff, but he wasn't really considered that important. What's so important about Columbus, then, or what makes him so important to Americans, is that in the 1910s, 20s, and so, a lot of Southern Europeans, including Italians, were moving to America. And so they were really having a problem. They were not considered to be sort of white, right? They were not considered to be European, English, whatever. They were looked down upon. And so in an effort to sort of prove their bona fides, they latched on to Christopher Columbus as an example, basically, of a successful, important Italian person who contributed a lot to America. And so in the process of doing that, then, he ends up becoming lionized. So they kind of overlook a lot of his faults. And so you'll see a lot of the Columbus statues and stuff date from that time period, and there's a lot of kind of stuff about him from that time period as well, and that's part of the reason why today he is still around, and he kind of became just sort of this part of our history. So Spain will also send out this guy named Magellan. His ships, or his voyagers, were the first ones to make it around the world. He does not actually make it around the world. He is killed in the Philippines. In fact, only 3 members of his original crew, I think, make it back, including one who was an African slave. So kind of an interesting contribution there. All right. I will say, too, that Columbus got the memes. So lots and lots of good memes out there. I like this one behind me in particular. Is this India? I also like there's a whole bunch of these kind of things about him coming over and discovering people's houses and stuff like that. So lots of good memes there for you if you want to check those out. This is an actual quote from Columbus himself, so don't just take my word for it that he did some pretty bad stuff. This is an example of some of his initial words of what was going on. So Columbus's diary here from the Arawak people who greeted him says, "They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk's bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." So that's just one example. There's plenty of others, and you can also just take a look at some of the actions and things like that that he did as well. All right, let's take a look here at a little bit more exploration. Sorry about that bottom part down there. Hopefully you can see it okay. So the rest of Europe is going to join in with the Spanish a little bit later on. Particularly, the primary reason they're going to be late to this party is because they had some instability. So England in particular has these conflicts, these religious conflicts between Mary and Elizabeth, and France kind of has similar things as well. So they kind of have to get their own houses in order before they start going out and exploring in these places. In other countries that we know of today, like Germany and Italy, weren't really even countries then. So, like just little tiny principalities and stuff were not really going to be doing this kind of stuff. Both of these countries are going to send out explorers to look for what is called the Northwest Passage. This was the route north of the Americas so that they could avoid Spain. So they could go around Spanish control without having to go around the Straits of Magellan in the south of South America. But it didn't exist at the time. Now, it does exist today, which is not good due to global climate change. We now have actually a way to go through the Arctic. It's a lot higher than they thought it was, but there is actually a way to go through the Arctic today to make it through. So just had to wait a few hundred years. To the two French guys here are Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain. They're going to search in Canada, and they eventually, a French colony called Quebec will be set up there. They want to find the Northwest Passage, but they realize after a while, no, this place is actually pretty great. Like, we can go ahead and set up stuff here and make money. So they're going to trade furs, and then Catholics will come to convert the natives as well. So money as well as conversion possibilities. The British then will send James Cabot, who will end up claiming New England, the area that we know of as New England today. Eventually, after Cabot, we will set up Jamestown, which will be set up as one of the first British colonies. It is an utter disaster. Everybody there is so busy looking for gold that they don't make food and stuff, and so people starve to death. It's pretty bad. And additionally, we also have this guy named Henry Hudson, who is a Dutch guy who will claim that little part of New England that he will name New Amsterdam, and later, when the British take control of it, it will be renamed to New York. That's why there's a lot of these Dutch names that are still up there in that area. All right, folks, hope that was helpful. Just a little bit of detail there coming out of 4.1 and 4.2, just a couple things to focus in on. Obviously, a lot more detail and information. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks so much.